All right, our next lecture in chapter one is dealing with classification. And basically, we want to understand why on earth would scientists, biologists, want to classify living things on our planet. So basically, this is a discipline of biology called taxonomy. And taxonomy deals with identifying and classifying organisms according to certain rules. Now, back in early times, one of the first persons to classify organisms was Aristotle, and Aristotle, you know, he was a brilliant scientist, but he didn't understand as much as we do today in biology, because biology itself is a very young science. So when he classified living things, he looked at one characteristic that was easily identifiable to classify either as an animal or a plant, and that was movement. But today we go beyond movement and we classify things even beyond simple characteristics. We classify things at the molecular level, examining a species' DNA. The person that actually is responsible for classifying a lot of organisms and came up with some of these rules in taxonomy for classifying and naming organisms is a scientist by the name of Carolus Linnaeus. And Linnaeus is considered the father of taxonomy. And he's the father of taxonomy for two reasons. One, he did classify many organisms in his lifetime. He came up with this system of classification known as the hierarchical levels of classification, and these would be the taxa groups, and these are based on evolutionary relationships. And he also came up with naming organisms by assigning them each a two-part name. That is called binomial nomenclature, a two-part name, and you might know that two-part name as the organism's scientific name. So the hierarchical levels of classification. At each level, it's a taxon level, or when you talk about all of them, it's the taxa. And the levels are from least inclusive to most inclusive. So the most inclusive means you have the most organisms in that group, and then as you start looking at more specific characteristics, you come down to a more specific least inclusive level, which would be the species level. So the most inclusive level, least specific, is the domain, and then the least inclusive, most specific level is the species level. So when we look at it, you have, in this order, it goes domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So these are the different taxa levels in Linnaeus's hierarchical levels of classification. And of course, if you look here you have human, an animal, here you have corn, which is a plant. You could see in the domain level, you have Euchara and Euchara. Now we come down to kingdom, Animalia for human, Plantae for corn. The phylum for human is Chordata. Then we go class, Mammalia, order, primates, family, Hominidae, genus, Homo, and species would be Homo sapiens. Over here, the genus is Zea and then maize. So you could see how they differ here. Now, two things that I do want to point out to you as we go through here. Look how in the phylum level, it's the names. Over here you have Phyta, and also in some instances, at this level, the phylum level, for zoologists, people who study animals, it's called the phylum. But for botanists, people who study plants, phylum is sometimes called division. So you could those terms, depending on the discipline of biology you're studying, it could either be phylum or division. The other thing that I want to point out to you is down here at the family level. Look at the different endings to the name. If you're looking at a family name in zoology, often the family ends with that ide ending, IDA E, Hominidae, Delphinidae. Uh, uh, so those are all names, family names to animals. But over here, botanists don't use the id ending. Sometimes you see it in a plant family name, but they more commonly use this ACA, and you'll see that a lot when you're doing your leaf collection. A lot of your leaf families have that ACA ending, so it's ACEAE. So Poaceae is the family of corn and like plants. So you have Hominidae and ACA. Whenever you see those on the end of the name, it is the family name. And up here, you have phylum and division. So, why do we want to classify organisms? Well, we classify organisms using characteristics, looking at them and trying to group them based upon those characteristics. And that was used in early biology. Now we look a lot more at the molecular level. How closely related are organisms based on their DNA, the composition of nucleotides within the DNA, and looking at evolutionary relationships. So there are 3 domains that you need to learn. They are bacteria. This would be the microscopic unicellular prokaryotes. So microscopic meaning very tiny, not visible to the naked eye. Unicellular means these are organisms composed of one cell. And prokaryote means that their cell type, these are cells that lack a true nucleus. And of course, you know what bacteria are. The archaea is another domain. These are bacteria-like. And these two are unicellular prokaryotes. So they are bacteria-like, so they are microscopic. They are one-celled organisms, and their cell type contains no nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. But archaeans are really cool because these are the organisms that live in extreme environments, often called extremophiles. Phile or philia means to love or to like. So you've heard of the term philosophy, a love for wisdom, or Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Well, extremophilic means that these organisms thrive in extreme conditions. This could be like a methanophile, bacteria that lives in an extreme environment of methane, a thermophile, one that thrives in temperatures of higher temperatures, a halophile. You know, you've heard of the halogen elements. Those are the salt-forming elements. So a halophilic bacteria or archaean would live in a more marine or salt-like environment. And then, of course, you have the domain Eukarya. And Eukarya are eukaryotic organisms. And eukaryote refers to the cell type, just like prokaryote. Eukaryotes are organisms whose cells contain a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. So if we look, here we have that common ancestor, and from that common ancestor, we have these 3 domains, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And then here you can see a little more of that common ancestor and how it branched out to bacteria and archaea. And then from the archaeans, we have a cell form with nuclei. So now we developed the eukaryotic cell. And then from that, we saw the branching out of the other kingdoms called protist. And then protist, from there we had plants develop. So we got photosynthetic protists that developed into plants. And then eventually we had the protists that became more animal-like. And those animal-like protists are now heterotrophic. And now you know what heterotrophic means. So we went from an autotrophic organism to a heterotrophic organism, and that's where fungi and animals come into play. So here you can see the lineage of organisms and these 6 kingdoms. So these are the 6 kingdoms of life: bacteria, archaea, protista, plantae, fungi, and animalia, where they came about. In the domain archaea, they are prokaryotic cells of various shapes, and we'll talk about some of those shapes. We'll do this in class. They have adaptation to extreme environments. They absorb or chemosynthesize food. So that's their mode of nutrition. They'll either absorb their food or they'll chemosynthesize food. So some of them are autotrophic in that they are chemosynthesizers. These would be the ones that live in the ocean deep at hydrothermal vents, absorbing that hydrogen sulfide gas and converting into usable energy. So these are the bacteria that would be at the bottom of the food chain. So they be that first level of the food chain that supports higher level organisms. And they have unique characteristics. So here you could see a methanogen right there. That methano means methane. So this is the bacteria that would thrive in methane-like conditions. In the domain bacteria, these are prokaryote cells of various shapes, adaptations to all environments, absorb, photosynthesize, or chemosynthesize food, and they too have unique characteristics. And the example of the bacterium here is Escherichia coli, which you've heard of, known as E. coli. It's found in your intestine. You can find it in hamburger meat, E. coli. So that's what it looks like, and we'll talk about naming bacteria as well with that group. So archaea, the kingdoms are still being worked out. In the bacteria, the kingdoms are still being worked out itself. In Eukarya, we have 4 kingdoms known as Kingdom Protista, Kingdom Fungi, Kingdom Plantae, and Kingdom Animalia. So here are the 4 kingdoms in the domain Eukarya. So protist, this is probably the most diverse group because as far as naming things, because you have those that are animal-like and then you have those that are plant-like. So you have protist that are plant-like, phyto, and those that are animal-like, zoo. And this kingdom itself is being considered by scientists to split into those that are more animal-like and those that are more plant-like. But as of now, it's one kingdom, Kingdom Protista, and basically what are the characteristics of these organisms? They are algae, protozoans, slime molds, and water molds. They are complex single-celled, sometimes filament, colonies, or even multicellular, and they absorb, photosynthesize, or ingest food. So there you could see why this organism, with its diverse characteristics, this kingdom might get split up. Kingdom Plantae, there's the passion flower. This includes certain algae, mosses, ferns, conifers, which are cone-bearing plants, and angiosperms, which are flower-bearing plants. So conifers are also called gymnosperms. This would be your pine cones. These are multicellular organisms that usually have specialized tissues containing complex cells, and they are photoautotrophs, so that means they carry out photosynthesis. In the kingdom fungi, examples of fungus include molds, mushrooms, yeast, and ringworms. These are mostly multicellular filaments with specialized complex cells, and they absorb food. And then there you could see a picture of the shaggy mane mushroom. And then, of course, Kingdom Animalia, the kingdom to which humans belong, you have representative of the red fox there. And this includes all animals on planet Earth, which includes sponges, worms, insects, fishes, frogs, turtles, birds, and mammals. We are multicellular with specialized tissues containing complex cells, and we ingest food, so we are heterotrophic. So plants are autotrophic, animals are heterotrophic, protists are autotrophic or heterotrophic. It depends on what type of protist you're looking at. The second thing that Linnaeus did for classification is he came up with this 2-part name. And we'll cover that and the humans in the biosphere in our next lecture.